Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 8 of Fracking Nightmare. As you can see from the background, I'm back in the studio in the southwest of England. It's a little warmer than it was in the mobile studio up on Barton Moss, but I shall be back there as soon as I possibly can. Well, it's been a remarkable week in the fracking arena. And the mother frackers have certainly upped their game, but so have the anti-fracking community. So we've got a lot to cover tonight. So actually, there's a possibility that the show might actually overrun, and I have special permission from the technicians here to continue beyond 9 o'clock if necessary, because we have some guests who I really want to give time to talk about their experiences. Our first guest, which will be meaning in the first half of the show, is Tina-Louise, who you met on the show last week, and the following day she was in the House of Lords. So we're going to be hearing her account of her experience in the Den of Lords. Well, first of all, I want to revisit Chris Breitling. No, it's Chris Faulkner of Breitling. You remember Chris Faulkner, the frack master, the guy that was trotted out in the UK to speak at numerous conferences and visit multiple locations around the UK to tell the local population how safe fracking is and how crazy they would be not to embrace the fracking agenda. Well, some interesting things have come to light. So let's take a look here. First of all, I want to make the observation that Chris Faulkner is a bit of a media whore. He certainly seems to get out on the mainstream media as much as he possibly can, touting about the wonders of the shale gas industry and, of course, his company, Breitling Energy. Well, here's a couple of other examples. Here he is on World Finance, and I couldn't resist this one. How appropriate on the front cover of Opportunist magazine. Well, that actually may depict why he was here in the UK. And here you see him at the gate of the Quadrilla site at Balcombe, being interviewed by the somewhat biased BBC. But the BBC, by the way, tell me that they are unbiased. And in fact, they tell me that the journalists at the BBC haven't yet decided on the shale gas issue. Well, let me just make the observation. I am as unbiased as BBC journalists. But I sit the other side of this very dodgy fence. Chris Faulkner, on his tour. But when we have a look at this guy, he's a bit of an unsavoury character. And it seems that a couple of years ago, his company, Breitling Energy, were accused of cyber squatting and defamation. And anybody who crosses Chris Faulkner, he seems to come up with ever increasing ways of defaming his opponents. So I've come up against this, of course, with BP, although they're smart enough to do it through a third party. It seems that Chris Faulkner decided to set up these online companies or online sites himself to, how should we say, defame? Because that's the term that was used in the courts, his opponents. So, Chris Faulkner. Now, he was waxing lyrical about how he lives on the edge of the Burnett Shale play in North Texas and how he wanted to ensure that everybody in this country, that the people of Texas embraced the shale gas industry. Well, in the last few days, it would seem that some things have come to light that would call into question those observations. The twin cities of both Dallas and Fort Worth are actually introducing ordinance to restrict the shale gas industry within the city limits. In fact, let me just read you from this opening paragraph from this article here. Several cities and counties in the US have instituted bans or moratoria on the oil and gas extraction technique of hydraulic fracturing or fracking in recent years, and Fort Worth's experience with urban fracking shows why. Fort Worth has been fracked to capacity, said resident Don Young. And he said, there's no turning back, and some days the air is so bad you can't even see downtown. Have some of this. Chesapeake Energy began offering $300 and a pizza party for owners of mineral rights in predominantly poor and working class African American neighborhoods about 10 years ago, and encountered little resistance. Residents have since been sickened by vapors from drilling operations, found their neighborhoods suddenly ruined by noise and fumes, and their water sucked up by drilling operations in the middle of severe drought. 5 sites were found in 2011 to be emitting pollution above state limits, according to a study commissioned by the Fort Worth City Council. And most of the 388 sites studied released visible emissions. Then right next door to Fort Worth, the Dallas City Council is considering letting fracking start up in town, with a vote likely to come next week. Well, let's see how that vote went. The Dallas City Council voted Wednesday, this is Wednesday of last week, to require any gas wells to be placed at least 1,500 feet from homes, a move that the gas industry says might as well be a ban on drilling. Now, this is pretty indicative of the mentality of people like Chris Faulkner. They have total disregard for the impact on the residents of the cities. Their whole agenda is based on greed. And we're going to see how that has effectively become the culture in the shale gas industry in this country as we go through the program tonight. So call it a hunch. I have a suspicion that Chris Faulkner was here in the UK because he had wind that his home cities, he lives in Arlington, which is situated between Dallas and Fort Worth, that his twin cities were about to institute an effective ban on shale gas. Now, if the likes of Dallas and Fort Worth are looking at banning or severely restricting this process, then we should be sitting up and taking note. But no, there is a very fast-tracked agenda to get this country fracked. And tomorrow, in fact, is very, very significant, because tomorrow Michael Fallon is due to announce the new areas of the country that are going to be licensed. Here we see the article from the Sunday Times yesterday. It shall be done. An appalling take on a Sunday on the religious text there. Of course, the church, the Pope, and certainly the Bishop of Blackburn have all said that this is an abomination against God creation. But let that not stop the global corporatists, because their socio-psychopathy knows no limits. In this article, it says, shale regions would be divided into boxes as small as a few hundred acres, giving its own license, giving companies the right to prospect. The purpose of this is so that when you have a licensed area which is held by one company, if that company only has the resources and the infrastructure to drill in one location, by breaking it into much smaller boxes and giving multiple companies the opportunity to drill, then it means that an increasing number of locations could be experiencing the living hell that is the experience of the people in many locations right across the US. And these decisions in Dallas and Fort Worth are absolutely seminal. So, the UK, the fast-track process. David Cameron is determined, mark my words, I said this in the Fractured Future talks earlier this year. That's not Lord Brown's Fractured Future talk of London School of Economics. That was my series of Fractured Future talks where I said that the Growth and Infrastructure Act was being instituted to enable central government to overrule all local, county, district authorities, to enable them to determine where the country will be fracked, and to give the companies the rights to get their bits in the ground. This is a total absurdity. Now, let's see why this is such an issue. Because here we are. Let's get the right slide up here. There we go. 64% of England, everything that you see in green, is potentially going to be licensed. So I have a suspicion that the anti-fracking community in this country is going to double, at least, in size within the next 48 hours, when people living in communities that are not yet licensed suddenly realise that they're under threat from this abomination. Let's remember that in this country, we haven't had any fracks since 2011, and the reason that we haven't had any fracks is because Quadrilla, the company that fracked the Fylde, caused something in the region of anything between 48 and 90 seismic events. They haven't exactly been transparent. But since it was established that they were responsible for the two significant seismic events, one on April the 1st, 2011, and the second one on May 27th, 2011, the moratorium has been in place. So for 2012 and 2013, the UK can report 2 frack-free years. And if we have anything to do with it, it will continue that way. But unfortunately, if our socio-psychopathic, global corporatist-driven government has anything to do with it, then next year could see the start of a process that is literally unstoppable. And we will be condemning future generations to lives of absolute abject misery. Now, I'm going to share with you something here. I want you to take a look at this for a second, because what you see here is a list of attributes of the Director of Communications at iGas Energy. Strategic communications, public relations, crisis communications, corporate communications, reputation management, crisis management. Last time we heard that was 2005 with Peter Power, Visor Consultants, and his crisis management of 7/7. Public affairs, media relations, internal communications, investor relations, stakeholder engagement, message development, speech writing. I love this one. We're going to come back to this one later. Corporate social responsibility and press releases. Now, that is all corporate speak for lies, deceit, obfuscation, and blagging. And we're going to look a little bit deeper at iGas's behaviour over the past week and their approach to consultation with the local community. Now, that's a quick roundup. Now, before we move on to Tina-Louise, I do want to acknowledge thanks to all the people who contributed towards the fund that we raised to bring straw bales to the site at Barton Moss. You will remember that a little over 10 days ago, the camp was destroyed by 70-mile-an-hour winds, and my own tent disappeared into the ether. Fortunately, I did manage to salvage the things that were left inside, but the tent was long gone. Anyway, over the last week or so, straw bales have been deposited around the windward side of the camp, and the gale force winds that were forecast for this weekend in the area didn't quite manifest. But I'm not so sure that the camp could survive another 70-mile-an-hour hit, but it can certainly survive the majority of the weather that's thrown at it, because the camp is here for the long haul. That's assuming that iGas are going to be on Barton Moss for the long haul. More of that in a little while. Now, last week's show, we had Tina-Louise from the Blackpool area, and Tina-Louise was giving us a rundown of her experience in the Blackpool area and the quest to raise awareness of the fight against the mother frackers. But she was in the House of Lords on Tuesday, and there we see Tina-Louise. I think she's blowing Lord Lawson a kiss there. But Tina, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can. You just said I was blowing Lord Lawson a kiss. Oh, that this would have been a joy to do. Yeah.
So you basically left Barton Moss on the Sunday, went back home, I think, for a night's rest, and then we're down to the House of Lords for Tuesday.
Yeah, and what a day. Really nothing. I suppose, if I was going with an expectation, it would have been that I would have at least some respect for an institution that had been around for that long, that there must have been something in it. You know, I mean, maybe that was just naive. It was just clearly naive. I thought that there would be something I would get out of the spectacle of it, or something, that there would be a gain, you know, that it wouldn't all just be hard, but it was all just hard. It was all just horrible. And, you know, I was part of the Occupy movement as well as this anti-fracking movement. And I've laid down with homeless people, people with issues, people, you know, who spend their lives like fighting for what they believe in. And there is so much more honor, politeness, common decency, and humanity in the people I'm surrounded by, that by the end of the day at the House of Lords, I actually felt nothing but pity, really. I felt really sorry for these hollow souls who seemed to have, you know, just no passion or joy. They were fed up. They seemed fed up. You know, and what you can't see when you watch the video is that when they're questioning us, I can look at the person who's asking the questions and answering them, but alongside them and all through the horseshoe of men that were there, they're glaring at you. They really glare, you know. I felt like an annoyance, you know, and it was, I never feel female unless it's good to feel female. I never notice it at work. I never have in my whole life that it ever hindered me in any way. If anything, I find it quite useful. I mean, I'm quite happy. But there, yeah, I was definitely a rare being, a rare sight. It didn't seem to be something they commonly had to deal with. Everybody else was Mr. Somebody, and I started off as Ms. Rothery and then ended up as everyone just referring to me as Tina, which would have been nice if we'd have all been referring to each other by first names. I could have said, hey, Nige, you know, but no, it wasn't quite.
Yeah, because Nigel Lawson, that's why I said you were, you looked like you were blowing him a kiss in the picture that I had of you. Of course, Lord Lawson actually was on the panel there, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And I have a little bit of text here, and it says, Lord Lawson asked Ian, who was with you, not me, to expand on the great risks he claimed that shale gas would create. And then Lord Lawson, of course, turns to Lee Petts of Remsol, and I believe that from what I heard, he gave Lee Petts the opportunity to sort of speak at length in response to Ian's observations.
It was very much the way, although it did start quite interestingly, because Ian insisted on giving an opening statement, which we thought was really important, and it was a brilliant opening statement, just to make clear who we were and why we were there. And so Ian did that, but it was much to the, you know, the annoyance of the chairman. He was not in the mood for anything. We only had 3/4 of an hour. There were 4 of us as witnesses. The first guy started, who was IOD, the Institute of Directors, and when he started, he was reeling off figures of gloom and doom and despondency, and how appalling Blackpool was, and how our per capita contribution to the UK economy was so vile and awful. It was terrible, but he was droning. And already by that stage, there were 2 lords asleep. I despair. You know when people talk about benefit scroungers and things like that? And I looked around the room and I saw 2 guys asleep, the rest of them clearly quite uninformed. And I thought, wow, you're in no position to have a go at people who are living off other people's money. You know, we pay for these people to sit there, and the least they can do is stay awake for the damn job, you know. And so anyway, so the IOD guy was admittedly much like Valium, so they shushed him up for a while, and then they progressed. But yeah, I certainly felt cut short many a time. But there were other times where they just let me go, which was nice. Ian, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I wouldn't have asked for anyone better at my side. Ian Roberts is part of the group I'm with, which is Residents Action on Filed Fracking. And we had to decide between the group who would go. And it was a good pairing, I think. Ian's a very trusted and sensible part of our community. I can occasionally be accused of radical activism because I dared to sleep in a tent. God forbid. You know, it cracks me up when you see all those people standing outside the iStore or something in tents waiting for the best bargain. They're not radical activists who can be mocked. You know, I'm just a grandma. In fact, my granddaughter is in the corner now, trying desperately hard to keep quiet while I do this.
Well, you obviously gave the hollow husks of the Lords a run for their money. We'll come back in just a second. We've got to take a short break right now.
Okay.
% of the English countryside is under threat from fracking, a process which has transformed the landscape in many parts of the United States and Australia. and contaminated the drinking water and air with highly toxic chemicals and gases.
1 in 3 hydraulic fracturing was using a carcinogen. So it really is a chemical cocktail that goes into the earth, of which up to 40% remains there.
The grandchildren were in the bath and they started screaming and everything that was in the water was burnt.
The MDs have been instructed not to report any negative health effects that they believe to be associated with living over a gas field.
There's nothing inherent about the shale gas process that is going to lead to problems.
Some of this material was actually taken to a large sewage treatment works, which had no capacity to handle radioactive materials of this kind.
800,000 gallons was dumped into the Manchester Ship Canal.
50 seismic events were recorded during just 6 fracking treatments.
What is the minimum depth that the fracking will fracture?
We can't tell you until we drill the exploration.
Have you no idea whatsoever? Because it doesn't look like you've done your research.
Shale gas is part of the future and we will make it happen.
We are just numbers and we are sat on this rich vein of gas, and they will do and say anything to get that gas out of the ground.
And welcome back to part 2 of Fracking Nightmare. I have Tina-Louise Rothery on the line, and we're talking about Tina's experience in the House of Hollow Husks, the House of Lords. I think one of the prerequisites is that they have to go through a surgical procedure before they can take their seat in the Lords, and that surgical procedure is, of course, a soul removal, and I'm not referring to their feet. So, Tina, you said that you got the impression that they were pretty shallow. I mean, did you get the impression that anyone had really done any research about the negative impacts of this industry, or were they just pro?
This was the Economics Select Committee for the House of Lords, and they've been at this for some weeks now. They've taken loads of evidence from loads of people, primarily, it seems, mainly the pro-fracking fraternity. I don't know how much they've had really from the anti-fracking. And they seem not to have absorbed much of that, because some of the questions, like at one point, one of the lords asked me, what chemicals are you talking about? And I said, well, we had to differentiate between the difference between when they're just doing exploratory drilling as opposed to when they do full-on shale gas production. And that therefore the chemicals that Lee Petz was referring to from Remsol, he was only talking about, like much of the time, they were only talking about traffic and chemicals associated with exploratory, which is so deceptive, because clearly once you go to full-scale production, it's an entirely different ballgame. And so I said, well, once they go to full-scale production, they have access to over 600 chemicals. Each shale play is different. And one of the lords actually said, oh, what, you mean here in the UK when they do it? I mean, what a stupid question. They aren't doing it in the UK yet. Blackpool's the only place they've fracked so far. So they aren't doing it here, and I corrected him. But he genuinely needed correcting.
Yeah, but even Chris Bone, the well construction manager of iGas, a couple of weeks ago, tried to tell me that this process was being used elsewhere in the UK.
Ah, I know. Because they talk about, like, drilling a hole and what they're doing at the exploratory stage, and they talk about that as if that would confuse us into not imagining that it's going, or to imagining that it's going to be all the same and gentle and calm, when it comes to full fracking. Or they say, well, we're not fracking yet. But then it's like I said to you last week, it's like someone prodding your body to work out which is the soft bit to stab you in. They're still preparing this. So, yeah, they were, I felt like they didn't know enough. I felt the questions were doled out. I remember once I did, what's that show? The Right Stuff, when I was with the Occupy movement. And when I went on to there, not the right, yeah, it was. And each of the celebrities was given the question or the piece from the paper they would read out. So they weren't really choosing it. Do you know what I mean? It was like they were told, here, you do this question. And this reminded me very much of that, which is where they were like allocated the question they would ask. It wasn't their choice of question. They just had to get through this series, tick the box, say they'd asked it, get us to document it. But, we had a really clear agenda. When Ian and I were going in, we said along with the rest of the group from RAF that what did we hope to achieve for the day? Well, what we wanted to achieve was that our community discontent was on public record, that we got to do that. And, you know, today the transcript came out. The video's been out for a few days, but the transcript came out. And that was really telling reading, actually. That was good to read it without the emotional side of the thing, because it was quite harrowing. And I can normally handle stuff, but I found that one of the most harrowing experiences ever, really, I think. And when the transcript came out, then that made for better reading. But no, I did feel they were ill-informed and very ill-mannered.
But it's a box-ticking exercise, isn't it? I mean, in reality, tragically, that meeting, and any meeting, really, in the Lords, has absolutely no bearing on the outcome. I mean, it is simply a charade. It's theatre.
That's what it felt like. It's so well described. It felt exactly like theatre. And what else got us was that we thought they were there to find out or to explore whether this country should proceed with shale gas extraction. And it was very clear that was not their purpose. Their purpose was made clear question after question, which was a continuous echo of, how can we get your community to say yes?
Exactly.
And it kept, you know, every step of the way, they would come back to that, and they kept trying. It was like they had a competition between themselves as to who can get them to give way. And it was like, well, do I feel like you're giving a bit? And, you know, this Scottish lord, he said, oh, he was the worst of the lot, you know, the Scottish guy. He said, he was like, do you think there's any hope you could even give a smidgen? And I couldn't. I tried to be reasonable in my answer. And he said, I'm looking for yes, no. So I just went with no, obviously. And then also, but, you know, I don't know if men feel the same way, but, you know, the word, when you look at a woman and you say, what will it take to satisfy you, in that tone, I felt that was a really loaded way of putting the question. Like,
but Tina, I mean, you know, listen, I mean, at the moment, you or the communities are being offered £100,000.
Hey!
I mean, David Cameron actually thought it should be at least $1 million because he made that Freudian slip, and of course said that, you know, communities will get $1 million because he couldn't believe it was only 100,000, so he thought that was the wrong number, so it must be $1 million, so he said $1 million. And of course he had to be corrected. But come on, I mean, £100,000. Surely you're prepared to accept just a little bit of BTEX in your water. I mean, you know, just 1 or 2% toluene for £100,000? No?
Yeah, why not? You know, already they've got in advance of that up here in the Fylde. We've got a brand new scout hut in one of the villages. They sponsored Flowers in Bloom. They've taken over the sponsorship of the Young Engineer of the Year. All quadrillas in here doing their smarmy best. But, you know, what gets me is that they must assume that the whole world operates on the same mentality they do, which is that, you know what, it doesn't matter what the risk is, there will be enough money to cover your satisfaction on that. Well, you know, and there just isn't. You know, we don't think like that. There is no amount of money. No amount. Why would there be?
Well, you know, Tina, my attention was drawn to a programme that I think went out on the BBC. I can't be sure. I don't watch TV. But somebody told me that literally a week or so ago there was a programme, and the whole purpose of this programme was effectively to normalise socio-psychopathic behaviour. And of course, you know, by normalising it, then people say, well, okay, you know, so we accept money for things that we know aren't in our best interest. Well, at least we're getting some reward for it. But of course, I mean, the reality is that those who accept the money aren't necessarily going to be the ones that suffer, because in a lot of cases, I mean, what we're unleashing potentially is a time bomb that's going to impact future generations, not necessarily the current generation.
See, what I think of as normal is not, when you say things like that, makes me realize, actually, maybe I'm just lucky, but I don't know, and I don't think I've ever really known anyone who would ever accept money to satiate their fear. I don't know anyone who's like that, apart from when you're dealing with the bad people in this industry. I don't know anyone who would do that. I know lots of normal people, and I've travelled a lot, and I know lots and lots of people.
No, but your definition of normal, and my definition of normal, and the global corporatist definition of normal, I mean, you cannot operate.
Maybe I'm looking at average, and not even average. You know, I live at lots of sectors, and everyone I know in all sectors and walks of life and world in countries that I've lived in has just been someone who would not be born. Maybe I'm just lucky. That's the only people I meet.
Maybe you are. Well, here, listen, let me just bring this up on screen, because this is ostensibly a graphic that's based upon Quadrilla's own website, of course, where they where they state that they are looking potentially at 120 well pads in the Fylde Peninsula. But, I mean, as we know, actually, if they really got this rolling, they wouldn't stop at 120.
Well, there's a dispute on this because they actually started off with 80 well pads with 10 wells per pad. So that was 800 wells we were getting. It's a figure we use just purely because we never like to be accused of overinflating. And then they've said, well, we knew there was the 1,200 wells, which is the 120 pads. But what we've actually a little bit more worried about now is they're talking about using the Fylde, this Lancashire area, as a guinea pig for what they call super pads. So nothing to do with feminine hygiene, but super pads, apparently you can get like 40 something wells on these things. And then that would make that map look slightly less populated. The way we figure it is they're going to get them sort of like every other field, the pads. But if they go to the super pads, we don't know how that will look. We know how it would feel.
Well, it doesn't matter whether actually it's 120 pads or 220 pads or 50 super pads. The bottom line is that that whole area will effectively become a wasteland. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, it's the same anywhere else in the world. What makes anybody think that the Fylde Peninsula is going to be any different?
It's like, when you get the trolls and everyone online and they're going, oh, well, you're not even a local. When we were down in Balcombe and stuff, and you go, you're not even a local. I'm like, oh, my God. Air and water have no boundaries, no barriers. They don't say, oh, let's not pass here. It's the north, or we shan't go down to the south if you pollute the air and the water. It doesn't make any difference. Wherever you are in this country, or in fact, wherever you are on this planet, this subject affects you. So a community protection camp needs you more than anything.
Well, as we see here, and I mean, this is what I've got on screen now here. I mean, this is just the areas that are being targeted, and that's under the current round of licenses. Like I said, tomorrow, I think we're going to realise just how socio-psychopathic Michael Fallon and his puppet master, Lord Brown, really are, by how much of the rest of the country that they are putting up for bidding. And like I said, I think by the end of the week, or certainly by the end of the year, which is only 20 odd days away, I think we could see the anti-fracking community increasing at a phenomenal rate of knots, and those seeds that have been sown through this year will seriously start to germinate.
Do you know what that map looked like to me? When you go into a butcher shop and there's a picture of a pig, and they outline which bit's the loin and which is the neck and all that stuff. It kind of looks like you're carving up a beast, to be consumed, which is exactly what they're doing. And it's really a sad image, sad image. And I so hope that sort of image gets out more. Our biggest enemy, again, it really is ignorance. People are led to believe the lying that the PR companies are putting out. And the reason that they believe that is that it's louder, it's more amplified. It's one bad view, but it's more amplified than ours. So, but as we continue to grow, and you're absolutely right, we have grown so much, particularly since Balcombe as a community, the anti-fracking movement. And it's been an amazing growth this year. And as soon as those licensing rounds come out, I mean, what was it the other week? They said both Croydon and Streatham in London. Are they mad? They've been there. You can't drill there. It's just crazy. And yet licensing's going ahead,
Well, Boris has said he wants to frack right throughout London if the shale is there. And I think it's Brent Council in West London that have declared themselves a frack-free zone, but it needs the other London boroughs to take a look at the threat to them as well.
See, the way I think it works, and it happened today in Blackpool, is that they, first of all, they break you down to insignificance and like, oh my God, you're in such a dire strait, you need this, which is why the IOD at the Lords was trying to put across how poor our contribution to the British economy was here in Blackpool on a per head basis. And then today a report came out about child abuse in Blackpool, and another report came out about poverty in Blackpool. We had the whole summer living through the 999 series of how dangerous Blackpool is, but every town has its issues. And the whole country is in rack and ruin. It's not just Blackpool, everywhere is, because of austerity and bad management by successive bad governments. So they can't say it's down to us. And then you see what they try and do is they'll try and set it up as an example of a failed place so that they can rebuild it. In the same way that when they start doing like Brent Council, for instance, they'll just demean Brent Council until it's decided that Brent, in order to pay its way in this country, should at least sacrifice itself to shale. And I think that's the way it works.
Well, that's why they think they've got an easier sell in the north than they have in the south. But anybody living in the south who thinks that they're going to escape this needs to think again. and needs to look at the areas that are already licensed. Last week I gave a presentation in Liverpool to a packed house there, and then on Friday night I was at Heathfield, and Heathfield is right in the southeastern edge of Quadrilla's licensed area in the southeast. And the people of Heathfield are only just starting to catch on. So I think we had about 50 or so people from the village of Heathfield, which, considering that there isn't an anti-fracking group there yet, is a pretty good start. But hopefully, after that presentation and after the announcement tomorrow, then people are really going to start to wake up and come on board.
Well, I think we're such a mobile movement. There's you're like a conduit for this. You take everything from everywhere, and you bring groups together by doing that. So you'll be up here talking to me, you'll be down there talking to someone else, and all that information flows beautifully both in real geographical world as well as online through the networks. So, and then things happen like today that will spread that information. Like this morning, that was just so fabulous. But I expect you're going to cover it.
Oh yeah. Don't take my punchlines. Yeah.
What I mean, and that I think a lot of things like that and some of the bigger incidents come about from groups that maybe aren't always there. They're not always present on the ground, but you send out the equivalent of a bat signal and you go, whoa, we really need some help. It's brutal here. And then things come and things happen and people get supportive. It's been really good as a rallying call, and I do hope that by the end of the year we get more and more groups, particularly in the places where you're managing to get to, where the smallest crowds are, because that's the important places to reach.
Exactly. Tina, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You are doing an amazing job, and you and all the crew in the Blackpool area. I mean, you were right up there amongst the pioneers. You're the only the only part of the country that has been fracked. And please understand that the way I mean this, I hope that's the way it stays.
So do I. And Ian, thank you so much for all you do. And thanks very much for everyone who tunes into the show and spreads the information afterwards and shares the links. Really important. Thank you.
Well, that's a great point, Tina, because, at the moment, I think the audience for this show is ostensibly the Greater Manchester Police, the iGas management, and the anti-fracking community. But our real challenge, of course, is to get it out to new people. To push those boundaries. This isn't about reaching out to the choir. We need to be bringing new people into the choir and encouraging them to look at this for themselves. And of course, that is our strength. We hold all of the high ground because we don't need people to take what we say at face value. We just need people to look at it for themselves, and they will very quickly realize that this ain't something that needs to be in anywhere near their backyard.
Absolutely.
Tina, thank you so much. I shall no doubt see you in Barton Moss sometime over the next couple of weeks or so.
There's not going to be a chance we won't see each other, not until we stop this thing.
Sure
do it socially.
Next time the interview is probably back in the tent. So.
Back in the tent. It was so cozy.
See you there. Take care, Tina.
Bye.
Right, that was a reference to the meeting at the House of Lords. Please take a look at that online and look at the transcript. And as I said in my blurb earlier today, Tina ripped Lee Petts, the Chief Executive Officer of Remsol, a totally new Remsol. Well, now we're going to move forward a couple of days and go to Thursday of last week, when iGas were scheduled to hold a public meeting at the Boys Note Golf Club. Now, the previous public meeting they had held was in a room about 12 foot by 12 foot, which of course indicated the size of the audience that they were anticipating turning up. Unfortunately for them, Helen Chunso and I were amongst the people that turned up that night. So they were somewhat taken aback, but nonetheless, the education process of the local community took a quantum leap forward. Now, the meeting last Thursday was changed at the last minute to be at the Salford Sharks Stadium, just up the road. Still only about a half mile or so from the Barton Moss protection community. Now, about 80-odd people turned up at Salford Stadium that night, a few from the protection community, but the vast majority were local residents. Unfortunately, iGas decided that this wasn't a public meeting, and it was a meeting that they had convened only for their community consultative group. So let's take a quick look at what happened when we went along to that meeting last Thursday.
Yeah, whatever. You have a very aggressive
It is aggressive.
That's right. Yes, I am.
And who do you work for, sir?
Doesn't matter. It's got nothing to do with you. Make your way outside.
Who do you work for, sir?
Doesn't matter. Outside.
Who do you work for?
Outside.
Would you like to tell me who you work for?
No. Who are you?
Ian Crane. Who are you?
Lovely. Outside.
Tell me who you work for.
No. Outside.
Would you like to tell me who you work for?
Right. Obviously.
You work for G4S?
Have you got an hearing aid or something?
Sorry?
Outside.
No, I've asked you the question.
Continue it, mate, and you'll be leaving properly. Okay?
Is that a threat?
No, that's
Was
a
that a
promise.
threat?
That's a promise.
This is how iGas. This is how iGas.
Outside.
This is how iGas hold their public meetings. This is how iGas enforce their security.
Yeah. No. Actually, you're usually protesting.
I'm not protesting.
Right? You've been told to leave. Not one of you want to leave.
We're not protesting, we're requesting that some questions be taken up.
Outside, and they'll do it for you. How many times has she asked you to go outside?
And how many times have we asked to get access into a public meeting?
She can't tell you that. Right? When they come down, you can do what you want, have all the questions you want outside. You can't do it in here, and this is what they've been trying to tell you.
Okay, we've been asking to get somebody from iGas to come down and address this group here.
Well, when they do that, they do that. They can't be in here. You know that, and you're just now being a bit pedantic, aren't you? Make your way outside.
Thanks.
Come on. Outside.
Sorry, what was your name? I didn't catch your name.
You're not going to get my name, mate.
Okay, so here we are outside the entrance to Salford Shark Stadium. There's probably about 60, 70 people here who have been trying to get access into the iGas meeting. Call it a hunch, but I would say that iGas deliberately switched the event from the Boys Note Golf Course to the Salford Stadium tonight in the knowledge that there were other events going on here, so that they knew that the security would actually be holding people away from the iGas meeting. But this is a classic illustration of an industry that says it wants to be transparent but will not permit the public to attend a public meeting. Totally outrageous.
I just ask you a question. It appears to me as though you are speaking on behalf of iGas when they've got their own head of communications, and Marie, you could come up. Well, therefore, why are you talking to us?
Because she allowed us.
No, she didn't allow us.
Yeah, but what he's saying is that you should have made one of them come down.
Yeah,
I'm trying to help you and have some sort of situation where
so you're facilitating. You're facilitating.
be provided with information. That's all I'm trying to do.
You obviously don't know. You obviously don't know the structure or the makeup of the iGas meeting.
I know the
you do.
structure and the makeup of
But we do.
We do. That's my job.
Well, we know.
Does anyone else want to have the details on here, guys?
But what he's saying is, then you realise they're actually using you. They're hiding behind you. Well, what could iGas possibly be trying to hide? I actually tried to speak to Anne-Marie Wilkinson twice today, but each time, surprise, surprise, she was in meetings. The reality is that this is a company that does not even begin to know how to practice social responsibility. But more of that after this break.
If you take an active interest in maintaining the optimum health and well-being of yourself and your family, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is the magazine you've been waiting for. Having taken Australia and New Zealand by storm, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is now available in the UK and Europe. Visit www.nznaturalmed.co.uk or call 01626 337 531 to order your copy now.
And welcome back to part 3 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, I said at the end of the part 2 that iGas had absolutely no idea of corporate social responsibility. Their director of communications, I really feel sorry for her. And I really feel sorry for a lot of people in this industry who feel trapped because they're there because they don't know how else to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. Yet they are participating in an industry that has a track record of absolute devastation, destruction, and incredible negative health impacts. All they have to do is spend a little bit of time looking at it. But as we heard straight from the horse's mouth at the iGas meeting at Boys Note Golf Club 2 weeks ago, they do not consider it to be their responsibility to look at the impact on this industry elsewhere in the world. So we know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with what has previously been labelled by Andrew Lobachevsky as political ponerology. Lies, deceit, obfuscation, socio-psychopathy. This is insane. Where we're at right now, we're in the process of trying to fight absolute insanity. This is humanity versus absolute insanity. When Anne-Marie Wilkinson spoke with me 2 weeks ago, she told me that she had watched the show and everything that I was putting out, a lot of what I was putting out was lies. I invited her to tell me exactly what it was that she thought that what I was putting out was incorrect. She said, well, I can't tell you right now, but we'll write to you. Now, I've been up on Barton Moss for the past 10 days or so. And when I got back to my house last night, funnily enough, there was no letter from iGas. And of course, twice today, I tried to give her the opportunity to share that information with me, and twice she declined. So we know exactly what we're dealing with. Now, we've also had to deal with the iGas enforcement force known as Greater Manchester Police. Now, I have to say, I also feel sorry for the genuine police officers in the Greater Manchester Police. But amongst that force are some thugs. Last Monday, we had 5 people arrested out of the Barton Moss protection community. And we know that the police came down with a target. The inspector was caught saying, we need one more arrest. Now, that could have been targeted individuals, or it could have been a number. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that it was just a random number of 5 arrests. Obviously, the video footage from last Monday was not conducive with the image of Greater Manchester Police. And on Wednesday, one of their chief inspectors came down to the camp and visited with a few people who were at the camp at the time to try to establish some understanding, some rules of engagement, if you like. They were looking to try to get the trucks up Barton Moss Road in 45 minutes, which is laughable. At Borkham, 45 minutes was the average delay for every single truck that went into the gate. At Barton Moss, the trucks come in convoy. So whether the convoy is half a dozen, or as it was on Friday, 14 trucks, then they're still looking to get them in 45 minutes. Well, obviously 45 minutes wasn't acceptable, and somewhere along the line, an hour and a half got mentioned. Well, on Friday, I was at Barton Moss, but I had to leave because I had an event in Sussex that night, so a 4.5-hour drive ahead of me. So I had to leave around about 11:20, which coincided with an hour and a half after the convoy started moving. Now, at that point, somebody in the Greater Manchester Police decided that it was time to change tactics. It was time to get aggressive. It was time to bring out the tactical tactical aid units. They are wrongly named. It should be tactical assault units. It's very evident that the people engaged in the tactical aid units go through the same selection process as the CRS in France. Now, having changed out the front line, the behaviour of the police was shocking. In fact, I received a communication from a Greater Manchester police officer on Friday evening telling me that they were saddened and embarrassed by what they had witnessed earlier that day. Let's take a look at the video here. What you're going to see is the live video here. Initially, if you missed it, we're going to slow it down in a second, of a disabled protector being pushed over and pushed into a ditch as the police attempt to arrest a lady who was 4 months pregnant. Now, let's take a look as this is shown in slow motion. Watch the guy with the placard. Watch what happens behind him, and you will see the head of Chris Purnell go past him as he's forcibly pushed out of the way, despite the fact that he's walking with a stick, and he's pushed into the drainage ditch alongside the road. Here he goes. There he goes. And then we see police officer X2108. There he is, the guy with the beard there, coming through and grabbing Marie, who immediately says, I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant. Now look at the face on the policewoman behind her. Her lips show pure aggression. What have these police officers been briefed? Have they been told they're up against Al-Qaeda rather than peaceful protesters? Have the Greater Manchester Police not consulted the guidelines of the Crown Prosecution Service regarding arrests at peaceful protests? This is completely outrageous. Now, I'm not in any way, shape or form tarring all police officers with the behaviour of the tactical assault units. But what I saw there and what some Manchester police officers saw there is disgusting. This is not the country that I thought I lived in, but it's the country that I'm becoming aware I'm living in. We are fast approaching a police state. Now, I have Brian Stack on the line. Now, Brian was at the meeting, or trying to get in the meeting, at the Salford Stadium on Thursday, and he was also down there on the front line on Friday. Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ian.
Brian, so before we go back and talk about the savage attack there on Chris Purnell, what's your thoughts on what you witnessed at the stadium on Thursday evening?
Oh, the stadium was disgraceful. Now, originally that meeting was supposed to be at Boysnop Golf Course, which was about 3:30. They actually changed that meeting location because I rang both Boysnop and City Reds to confirm it. And they was requesting my details for they tell me where, and I explained to them as a local resident I'd like to attend. And when we got to the door was when they decided that it was a private meeting and they had a list of 22 people to invite.
Can you tell me, how far away do you actually live from the Barton Moss well site?
I've actually got a map next to me on the wall. It's less than a mile. Also, the lady who I spoke to when I arrived at Salford City Red said her catchment area for residents for the meeting was 18,000 residents. Now, I don't know whether that's a number she picked out of the air. And that they'd been having consultations and letters sent out to people since 2010, which is the 3 years the meetings have been going on. But nobody I know has had a letter ever.
18,000. Well, they clearly weren't expecting 18,000 because they weren't going to open the stadium for that. We have no idea how big the room was that they were holding the meeting in the stadium, but it turns out that the meeting changed because obviously the fact that you were told the meeting location at the time they spoke with you, somebody was still under the impression that it was a public meeting.
Well, yeah, when I spoke to, they actually put me through to an iGas person at City Reds when I phoned up because they asked the reception staff first, and they actually confirmed that it was okay for me to bring along my little boy, and that they had changed the venue because they needed more space because they were aware that more people were arriving. So I don't know what happened with that one.
Brian, by the way, just to change the subject, because I got a little bit distracted by the background behind your head.
Yeah.
Is that... I better not say very much, otherwise you might find somebody knocking on your door at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because as we know, the tactics of the police are being ramped up. I mean, we talked in the past about the harassment of one of the protectors by social services. And I think, as you know, last Thursday evening, when I was driving back to the camp, I was followed by the police, followed into the camp, where they told me that they suspected that I had been drinking. So I asked them when that was, whether it was 2007 or 2008, because not a drop of alcohol's passed by my lips in 5 years. But, I mean, this is the kind of harassment that we're starting to see now. So an interesting backdrop you have behind there. I'm assuming it's green screen. Anyway, sorry. So let's go back to iGas. So obviously you didn't get any closer to the meeting at the stadium than I did.
No, I arrived about 20 minutes earlier than anybody else because obviously I knew there was a large group coming. So I wanted to get in first and see what iGas had to say. But the lady I spoke to, the iGas employee, had a lovely little list which she showed me with 22 names on it. And when I asked, since when was it not a public meeting. She says, well, these residents that we've invited liaise with the whole community, and the whole community knows about what's going on.
So, first question, how are these 22 selected by iGas?
Well, presumably, they're the landowners, what iGas need to get their hands on, from what I've had a chat with a few people. But certainly these 22 people don't attend any of the residents' meetings that I've been to lately.
Well, in fact, you and I attended a residents' meeting in Peel Green, what was that, 2.5 weeks ago?
Yes.
Where basically there was some 70-odd people in the room, and there was a lot of frustration in the room because they had never been invited or made aware of any public consultation event being held by iGas.
Yeah, there was a lot of Earlham residents there, and they all knew as much as I did when I first spoke to you about what was going on in the area, and that was nothing.
So this really is very much like Tina-Louise was talking about the House of Lords, where it's a box-ticking exercise, where iGas can claim that they've consulted with the local community and therefore should be given free hand to plough on with their abomination on Barton Moss. But in reality, of course, very, very few people in the community, although it is increasing now because of the work being done by the protection community and people like yourself who are making the effort to speak to the tenants' groups.
Yeah, if iGas had consulted with the community, they wouldn't be half of the community down at Barton Moss with the camp supporting it. And as you say, the numbers are growing, the more people know about it.
Well, as we saw on Friday morning, there were at least 3 times the number of people in front of the convoy that were there on the previous Monday. And the bulk of those were people from the local community. Now, just before we started speaking, I showed the footage of Chris Pennell being pushed off of the road as the officer X2108 pushed his way through to grab Marie. Now, I've got a short clip of an interview, just a guy seeking to establish Chris's well-being in the immediate aftermath of that. So let's just take a quick look at this.
Can you just tell us what happened to you for 2 seconds? Are you okay?
Yeah, I deserve to know.
What happened to you, buddy?
I was observing as a witness the events of today, and the police charged through the lines, and I tried to get out of their way.
Right.
And I couldn't move quick enough, and I was just picked up and thrown.
And you have a walking stick here, I see.
Yes, I was on a stick at the time.
You're disabled?
And I was thrown, and I ended up here.
You were thrown on the side by the police?
I was actually picked up and thrown from the road to here.
By how many police?
Physically, yeah.
You were thrown on the side of the road. A disabled man was thrown on the side of the road.
I was actually thrown into this ditch under this bush.
What's this gentleman's name? Yeah, it is, isn't it? I'm thinking.
So you feel safe with the Greater Manchester Police protecting you, then, do you?
And then either slide him out that way or
no comment. Thank you very much. I hope you're okay.
Well, that's Chris Pennell, looking to be in reasonable shape, but the latest information is that he has a broken femur. Now, tragically, Chris was due to go into hospital for a knee replacement anyway, but now he's going to be in Warrington Hospital for at least the next 10 days. Now, having watched this footage, I think anyone would consider that the behaviour of the Manchester Police was somewhat excessive. So I think if you think it's appropriate, then please feel free to contact the Greater Manchester Police and certainly the Police Commissioner and let them know how you feel about this. Unfortunately, of course, we are experiencing this more and more around the UK. And many of these police officers, of course, won't be on the police payroll in a few years because it was announced earlier this year that Greater Manchester Police is being forced to reduce its numbers. And I can pretty much guarantee that within the next 5 to 10 years, that almost all of those police officers will be on a private security payroll. And then we can expect behaviour and social skills such as those displayed by the individual in the footage from the stadium on Thursday. Now, Brian, I think that Chris is doing the right thing there by not saying very much and keeping his powder dry, because clearly there will be a legal case here. But you were there. What was your take on events on Friday morning?
I was absolutely gobsmacked by the behaviour of the police. As like when I first come down, I've always been pro-police and pro-authority, and that's changed drastically over the last couple of weeks. Now, seeing what happened to Chris and actually filming that myself, I was just in shock with what actually just happened before my eyes, because you can clearly see the copper put his hands on me, shoved him down the ditch. Old man with the walking stick, come on. There's a lot of officers I've spoke to today and like yesterday, and they've actually said they're ashamed of the behaviour of the other coppers, especially them of the X division, which is what the tactical aid units are a part of.
Yeah, I mean, well, what have these guys had? Have they had a soul removal, a lobotomy? I mean, this is not what I would consider to be normal human behaviour. I mean, these people, and I use that term loosely, seem to be absolutely devoid of humanity and compassion. I mean, we know now that once the Greater Manchester police officers are moved out of the front line and the tactical assault units come in, basically it's like dealing with drones. I mean, if we had clone technology, I would say that was almost what we were witnessing.
Yeah, I really don't know what set of rules they operate on, but it is not... It's not your normal policing rules. They're literally just thugs employed to go and beat people up, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and listen, I mean, like you, I've always been a defender of the police. In fact, I've taken it in the neck from some of the protectors, both at Borkham and Barton Moss, because I have acknowledged when the police have behaved well. But, I mean, this is just totally out of place, because this is a peaceful protest. There hasn't been a single incidence of any non-peaceful behaviour, and yet these thugs are put in the front line, initially behind 82-year-old women such as Anne, who is a real trooper. I mean, she's there at every given opportunity, and then they basically bodily lift her out of the way so that they can get right up against the front line of the protection community. You know what? It shouldn't matter whether the protectors take 5 hours to walk down Barton Moss Road. Fundamentally, provided they're moving, they're not breaking the law. But the police, or certainly the X division, seem to be determined to facilitate the iGas agenda.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say they have the right if we weren't moving, because the way the police are behaving, it's just, it wouldn't be acceptable in public if me or yourself started walking around pushing people down ditches and beating people up, but why are the police getting away with it? It's just disgraceful.
It is disgraceful. Brian, thank you so much for joining me. And of course, last week you were intimately involved in the creation of last week's show, because you let me use your studio facilities, and I was actually preparing part 3 whilst part 2 was being broadcast. So you saw how fine and close to the wire we run sometimes. And thank you so much for your help and your support. And I look forward to hooking up with you in Barton Moss over Christmas and New Year.
Yes, thank you. I'll see you in a few days. And I did see how quick you can run up and down stairs.
Take care, my friend.
See you in a bit.
See you, Brian. Now, iGas. What is going on with iGas? 2 weeks ago, exactly yesterday, Andrew Austin announced to the press that iGas had commenced drilling at its Barton Moss location. And we've seen a few convoys go in over those 2 weeks. 3 on the first week and 2 this week. So 5 convoys of trucks going in. But in the last day or so, a lot of infrastructure has been removed. It is rumoured that iGas have experienced a major operational failure. Of course, that was on our agenda to discuss with iGas at the not-so-public meeting on Thursday at the Salford Stadium. But on the basis that iGas did not deign to communicate with us, we're not able to ask the question. So I wonder how much truth there is in the report that iGas have experienced a serious shaft collapse. Have iGas abandoned the site? Or have iGas just removed infrastructure for an extended Christmas and New Year break? Well, either way, we'll be watching this space. But not least, iGas got a very early Christmas present this morning when at around about 5:30 a.m, a wind turbine blade turned up. Now, I can only assume that whoever was responsible for delivering this gift had heard that iGas had potentially had a major operational failure and decided that perhaps the site could be used for a wind turbine instead. So this wind turbine apparently weighs about 1.5 tons, and it took a little while to assemble, but there it is, right across the main entrance to the iGas site. And there is Santa, actually. His reindeer apparently is just behind the turbine there, having a mince pie. Meanwhile, this is Santa's looking rather bedraggled there, I must confess. But Santa just making sure that the gift is delivered properly. Now, this is thanks to Kate Nye, the lovely Kate Nye, for this photograph. This is after it had been pushed or dragged away from the iGas entrance onto the bridge over the M62. And here we see the contractors moving the components there. So now this is the first piece of direct action that we've seen at Barton Moss. Unfortunately, the turbine didn't stay in front of the gates for too long. It was moved after a couple of hours or so. Maybe next time it comes with a truckload of cement, but hey, who can tell? All of these direct actions, they're all down to individual initiatives. And I, for one, am absolutely supportive and applaud any such initiative. I might not have said that some time ago, but I do now, because I am witnessing firsthand the behaviour of the socio-psychopathic global corporatists and their enforcers in action. And having been involved in this industry, having known how this industry operates, having been in the gaslands of Colorado, of New Mexico, of Pennsylvania, of southern Queensland, it is my worst nightmare to consider that this abomination will ever be unleashed beneath this country. Now, the iGas stock, when we looked at this 2 weeks ago, it was at 109.5. This is 109.5 pence. At close today, it was at 105.47. So a drop of 4 pence, which means that Andrew Austin has seen his stock holding devalue by about £400,000. So sorry about that, Andrew. I won't be shedding too many tears. And actually, you know what? We're looking to get that stock price to come down where it should be. We would encourage you to concentrate on your conventional hydrocarbon interests. But while you're messing with unconventional hydrocarbons, you're messing with a serious force, a force known as humanity, a force that is determined to retain the quality of this planet for future generations and not permit socio-psychopathic global corporatists to destroy the water, the soil, and the air. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Take care.